My name is Julie Cook. I'm the Waste Diversion and Recycling Coordinator here on campus. For the next year, actually, I don't know if any of you have heard of the Office of Campus Sustainability. Jonathan Rousseau, Brigitte Morin are kind of the two main people that work there. Brigitte just went on maternity leave and had her baby a couple days ago, so I'm taking over for her for the next year. So actually, just so that you know, the Office of Campus Sustainability is in the Protection Building, and we're part of Physical Resources Service.
Where's that building?
It's 141 Louis Pasteur. It's right around the corner from the pharmacy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Just down that way, right?
Yeah, very close by. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about waste diversion and what is waste, both kind of generally and also on campus, so you guys will get a good idea of what that is. What do you think waste is? While your mouths are full, please.
Right.
Something you don't want anymore.
Something you don't want anymore? Yeah?
Specifically?
Yeah.
It can be food waste, it can be
Paper waste, garbage.
yeah, things that are broken, things that you don't need.
Yeah, yep, definitely. So, yeah, like you said, things you don't need, things you don't want anymore, things that are no longer of use. So that could be something that's broken or damaged. It could be something that's harmful to us, like moldy, or maybe it's past expiration. It could even be hazardous, for example. Another way of looking at it is also unneeded and excessive consumption. So, for instance, having 100 pairs of shoes that are the same, that's a little excessive. It could be considered waste. Having said that, in nature, these concepts of recycling and reusing that we often talk about are not new. So basically anything in nature, there is no waste in nature. All items in nature are composed of matter. It can't be created or destroyed. It exists in a cycle. So the kind of water cycle that you've heard about since grade school, with precipitation, evaporation, that sort of thing, that's an example. Humans, on the other hand, we're another story. We kind of created this concept of waste, and we're still struggling how to deal with it. So how do we actually create waste? There are a couple different ways. There's something called mass loading, which basically just means the accumulation of any sort of substance in great quantities in a given space. So that can even be like a large amount of people in a small space that produce enormous amounts of waste. So the example given here is people in a cottage. If you've got a couple in a cottage, they're not going to produce quite as much waste as if you've got 60 people in a very small area. Then there's also the idea of physical manipulation. So changing the rate at which a substance is broken down. So like I was saying, in nature, we have these sort of natural biodegradable processes, but humans, when we physically manipulate some of those materials, we change the chemical compounds. It makes it very difficult for it to be broken down by nature. An example, perfect example of that is plastic. So both of those, like I was saying, the mass loading, physical manipulation, create that condition where a substance can't be broken down by natural processes. And the key factor here is time. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the consequences of unsustainable growth. So just two examples of a great many. Would be the North Pacific Ocean. So this is something actually that I just learned about that I thought was actually pretty interesting. In 1997, there was a Californian guy who was sailing around. He was actually in a sailing race around Hawaii, and he was heading home with his crew, and he decided to take a shortcut. And he was in the North Pacific Ocean, but it was a specific region of the North Pacific Ocean where he took a shortcut through an area that a lot of seafarers don't really go, because there are ocean currents that kind of converge in the same spot, and it's just not navigable very easily. So he did go through that area, and he was very surprised to find that 90% of the materials floating on the ocean surface were plastics, like garbage, you know, just all kinds of crap floating on the ocean. And so actually since that time, because it had such an impact on him, he first of all created a whole research team that was trying to find out, okay, you know, what is the extent of this? And one of the findings of that study was that plastics are 6 times more abundant in that part of the ocean than zooplankton, which are these little organisms that exist in the ocean. So that's just one example. We think that we use these plastics, and even if we recycle them, we're not actually 100% sure that, you know, it is recycled, or where is that material going. You know, there's a lot of things that happen beyond our sight. So that's one example. The other one is the Fresh Kills landfill, which is or was the biggest landfill in New York City, and in fact, is it the world? Yes, it was the largest landfill in the world. So 3.4 square kilometers. It was a few times the size of Central Park, just to give you a figure. 25 meters taller than Statue of Liberty, and 650 tons of garbage added to the site every day. So it was massive. And it was constructed right over a region of wetlands. So thankfully, though, a positive note to that, not to be so doom and gloom, is that in 2009, the city actually reclaimed that area, and they're transforming it into a park. It's going to be like a massive, massive park, but that's like a 30-year plan. But anyway, that's just to give you 2 examples. Just very briefly, let's talk about the history of waste. What are some of the factors that affect humans producing waste? Very obvious one is population growth. So, you know, most people know by now that by the year 2050, we're going to have 9 billion people on the planet. We're growing exponentially, and the Earth's resources are having a really hard time sustaining us. We also have the Industrial Revolution and the rise of capitalism. So we've got this mass production of the same items at a cheap price. That's another kind of phenomenon to consider. We've got urbanization. So I forget what year it was, but it was 2008, between 2008 and 2010, we passed this threshold where now more than 50% of people live in cities than in rural areas. So we've got lots of people living in, what's that?
So is this world or
Yeah, just in general, yeah. So I mean, I'm not talking every region, but just if you average it out, there are more than 50% living in cities. So where does all that waste go? We've got the phenomena of marketing, so convincing people that they need things, sexy packaging and all of that. And then we've got this underlying implication that our resources are infinite, and that's kind of been ingrained in our culture and in our psyche. And then of course we have globalization. So any one product, to create something especially that has multiple parts, you know, can begin in one country, but you've got the different parts being made in all different countries, and so the carbon footprint of that one small item is just enormous because of that. So just talking a little bit about the principles of waste. You guys have heard of reduce, reuse, recycle. That's a chant that I think everybody knows, but it is a lot more than that. It's really a model for, you know, basically the least to the most amount of energy consumed. So the reduce is really kind of your essential factor here. So the most essential way to reduce waste is just to avoid generating it in the first place. So, you know, not purchasing products that have excessive packaging, purchasing products that are durable, that are going to last. So you get those as an example. This is a kind of become a pet peeve of mine. Those little 99-cent gloves that you can get at like Zellers or any other store that last 3 weeks, and then you're like throwing them out. And I was just talking to a woman, yeah, but like those ones, they're useful for 3 weeks.
Well, no, like
yeah.
now you can use your fingers for stuff.
Now you
now they're really useful.
Now you just chop them off and you. That's true. It's a way of reusing instead of just throwing it out. So, yeah, I mean those things are just the worst. And what I was saying about people having this sort of psyche of things, you know, oh, if it doesn't work anymore, I'll just throw it out and I'll buy something new.
Hi, Joe.
I was just at my visiting my bank 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was talking to one of the ladies there at the bank, and I forget how we got onto this, but we started talking about those gloves, and she said, "Oh, I love them." She's like, "I just match them with all my different kinds of clothes," and she said, and they're so great because, you know, whenever they're bad or whatever, because I said to her, "Yeah, but they don't last very long." She's like, "Yeah, but I just buy new ones," you know. So it's this idea like, well, whatever, I'll just buy a new one. It's okay, without any thought of, well, where is all this going, you know? So that's the reduce. Then the reuse would be like reusing the cloth bags instead of plastic bags, food containers, water bottles like this, or repairing an old item that instead of throwing it out.
Yeah.
You might want to turn that camera around and get
Plastic.
Yeah. More examples. Right. Shame. Just kidding. And then you've got, and it's interesting that you've got recycle, which is just one step away from throw away. So recycling is great, but you know there are other things that you can do before recycling that are even more important. So recycling is basically, you know, you throw out that plastic container and it goes to a facility for recycling, gets transformed into raw materials, made into a new product again, which, like I said, is great, but that's kind of like the last step before, you know, the woman from the bank who's like, yeah, I'll just throw it out and buy something new, you know. Okay, I have a question for you. The next slide is a chart that shows the countries of the world that are basically the most wasteful. I would like to ask you what country you think is the most wasteful, and more specifically, the one that produces the most waste per capita, not in absolute terms.
Are you just talking about solid waste, like not wasting?
Like garbage,
I
like
think
bags
sure.
of garbage, yeah.
What do you guys
I would
think?
say one of the
United
developing
States?
countries.
United
I'd
States.
say US.
Yeah, US.
Canada's probably a close second.
Okay.
What about China though? There's so many people.
So I lied, there's no chart. It is Canadians.
Oh,
Actually,
It's Canada!
Oh.
Yeah, it's brutal. So among developed countries,
Oh.
I don't have stats on the developing countries, but among developed countries, we're the worst actually. And the thing is, it's just so counterintuitive because we have this perception of ourselves, and the world, maybe less so now in the past few years, but the world seems to have this perception of us as being like we love nature, and I mean our flag has a maple leaf on it, you know, but actually we consume enormous amounts of waste per year. So like it says here, 1,800 pounds of waste per year.